Shall I kick off?
Yeah, I think get people to sit down.
Is everyone ready for us to start? Give you a couple of minutes. I know we're running tight to time, actually, so you won't have more than 2 minutes.
If you sit down...
Yeah, we can start.
This is not working.
Sorry, can somebody just check Ujjal's mic?
It's working now.
Yeah?
The sooner you sit down, the sooner we'll begin, and then your troubles will be over. Thank you.
I think we roll, do we?
All right.
Okay. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. This was supposed to be a morning session. I know we're running slightly late. Lovely to be back in Kasauli, and thank you for inviting us both to the Khushwant Singh Litfest. I suppose this could be called the NRI session. I'm based in London, as some of you know, and Ujjal is a very eminent NRI in Canada. We'll learn more about his life and his achievements shortly. Can I just say at this point that whilst I'm very much see myself as an Indian, I'm conscious that I'm not here permanently and there are sensitivities that I may not be aware of. So if there's anything that I say that is not correct, please bhul chuk maaf, as the Granthi in my Gurdwara says. Now, before we start, we have tried several, yeah, sure. Okay.
Can you please stop talking? Anybody that wants to talk can leave. Sit down. Let's have a conversation. Let's have fun. Thank you.
I knew I could rely on the politician to shut everyone up. Right, before we start the discussion, can I give you some background on Ujjal? And can we start by wishing him a very happy birthday, which he's choosing to spend with us?
Thank you. I'm all of 77 today.
A good age. Right, he was born in Dosanjh in the Jalandhar district of Punjab. And in 1964, he emigrated to the UK at the age of 18. He then shifted to Canada in 1968 and qualified as a lawyer there. He became Premier of British Columbia in 2000, and he was the first person of Indian origin to lead a government in the Western world. He was an MP from 2004 to 2011, including a period as Minister of Health and Minister responsible for multiculturalism, human rights and immigration. He was then Attorney General in British Columbia from 1995 to 2000. He is a civil rights activist and a pacifist and has campaigned for better legal rights for farm and domestic workers in Canada. In 2003, he was awarded the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, the highest honor conferred by the government of India on overseas citizens, Indians rather. He has published 2 books. The first was his autobiography in 2016, Journey After Midnight, and he will tell us why he called it that. And the second is a novel published earlier this year, The Past Is Never Dead. Having read them both, I recommend them highly, and they're available in the bookshop. Finally, as to your achievements, at the inaugural Canadian South Asian Literary Festival earlier this year, he got the Best Author Award. So there was a separate award for fiction, one for non-fiction, and overall, Ujjal was the recipient. So quite a high achiever by any standards. But Ujjal, the journey wasn't an easy one, was it? Why don't we start with the first journey from rural Punjab to the UK?
Well, when you go on a... Hello?
Take this.
When you go on a journey like that, there are no guidelines. You simply jump in and try and swim as fast as you can. And I think in 1964, ever since I've known myself, there's always been this desire in Punjab, at least, for people to go abroad. And I wanted to go abroad for all the reasons people go. And the additional reason was that my father was a loving father, but a huge disciplinarian, and I wanted to get away So I was able to persuade him to buy me a ticket while I arranged for a college admission myself behind his back. So that's how I got to England.
Tell us what you did. Sorry, this is still not working. Are we going to have to keep swapping? But tell us what you did when you got there. I mean, you did some pretty difficult jobs, British Rail, etc.
Yeah, my first job in Britain was shunting goods trains in Derby Goods Yard, starting 2 in the morning and finishing 2 in the afternoon, 12-hour shifts. And after that, I tried to go to school, but my information was all registered wrong by my friends because I was new. So I had to run away from Derby and go to Bedford and re-register in my real name and real date of birth so that I could go to evening classes. And I started working in a crayon factory, made crayons, those little crayons the kids use. I used to stand there next to the machine and pour wax and color and all that stuff. And then because I wanted to get into an educational environment, so I got a job as a lab assistant at a secondary school where I had lots of time to just set up experiments for the classes, but I had lots of time to study and listen to BBC. And I've never gone to school in Britain to learn English. I didn't go to an English school in Punjab. I went from a village school to Ramgarh College, Fagwada. I learned English listening to BBC Radio 1. Listening to all the debates and conversations, and that's how I did a couple of O-levels in the evenings in Britain. I edited a Punjabi news weekly with some other friends. I tried to get into university, but I didn't have the money, and nor would they admit me because I didn't have even grade 12 from India or A-levels. But they did, one university, New University, did agree that if I could pass British History O-level, they will certainly admit me. I came home and I looked at the British History O-level syllabus and I couldn't tell one King George from another King George, one Queen Elizabeth from another Queen Elizabeth.
You're not the only one.
I was so disappointed. That was when I started thinking about my Massi, who had gone to Canada in 1954. And she used to send me these beautiful postcards. I thought, I should try my luck there. And I was in London during those days, helping people with this news weekly. I happened to see the Canadian High Commission at Trafalgar Square. I went in and they just grabbed me. Nobody wanted to go to Canada in those days. And I said, I want to go. And they just sat me down, filled my forms. I had no documents with me. They said, no, you can bring the documents later. And they gave me a provisional approval and they gave me the medical requirements. And I came back with the medical requirement and documents and they just stamped.
It all sounds so easy. I mean, these days.
I know, my life has been such.
No, having read the book, I remember, I think you turned up with the £3 that you were allowed to take to the UK, and you arrived in freezing weather in December and had to sort of walk to the home that you were staying in with the bedroll on your head.
Absolutely.
Which resonated.
We carried our own. Well, in India in those days, they used to prepare you with bedrolls and all the clothes thrust into them. No suitcases. So I carried that from the train over my head to the place I was going to, freezing cold.
Well, I think the UK's loss was Canada's gain because he achieved even more when he was in Canada and worked very hard to do that. So you got to Canada, you started working in a sawmill where you injured your back.
Well, yeah, I went to apply for various jobs and they told me that for some I was overqualified and for many I was underqualified. And I talked to my uncle who was a lumber grader in a sawmill. Most of the immigrants in those days and prior used to work in sawmills. So I talked to my uncle, my mustard, who was a lumber grader. He said, if you can do industrial first aid attendant course, I can get you a job in a mill to pull lumber, while they'll give you 10 cents an hour extra for being the first aid attendant. So that's what happened. And I had a day job. That was the beauty of the first aid attendant's course. So I would pull lumber from 7:30 to 3:30, sweating all day. and then go home and just eat a bit and rush over to the night classes. And I completed half a year of my BA doing night classes, pulling lumber on the green chain, and then my back was injured, and that kind of sped the process of education.
But then when did you do the LLB?
Well, I did my half-year BA, and then my back was injured. I was off for a year, and then I went back to school, didn't go back to work because I couldn't do any heavy lifting, and I wasn't qualified to do anything else. I did my BA from Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, and then my law from UBC. I met my wife at Langara. She's there somewhere at Vancouver College. She was upgrading her teaching credentials, and I was doing my BA.
I'm glad he clarified how you pronounce Langara. I was thinking, is it Langara? You know, Langara.
Langara.
Totally different term.
It's a First Nations name. Anyway, so we met there, and then we got married before I finished my BA even. She had to lie to her parents that I was already going to do masters. I hadn't even done my BA. Then from there, she supported me. Before that, my brother supported me, so kind of my family supported me through my BA and my law.
Okay, and then, you know, you go from a dusty Indian village that we're all sort of familiar with to lead the government of the third largest province in Canada. Now that's incredible because even now, if I look at the UK, yes, we have Rishi Sunak, but certainly if you look 23 years ago, we would not have had many politicians of Indian origin. And I assume the same went for Canada.
Yes.
Forget lead the government in terms of politicians. Were there many at that time?
Well, there was one MLA that was elected in 1988, I believe, or 1986. He was the first brown MLA to be elected in the country. And he was the first provincial cabinet minister, too, in 91. I got elected in 91 to the provincial legislature. I failed in 79, in 83. And then I didn't run for the next two elections because I was fighting the Khalistanis from 1984 onwards. And too tired to run in elections and make a living at the same time. And then I finally ran in 91, and against my own wishes, because I was making good money as a lawyer, and politicians don't make any money in that country.
I was going to touch on that, yeah. So it really was
I used to pay more
dedication.
in taxes as a lawyer than I made as an MLA when I got elected in 91. And one of my sons still is angry at that because he thinks we would have been richer had I just stayed as a lawyer.
You undoubtedly would have been.
That's what he thinks.
Okay. And then as Attorney General, you had some pretty tough moments, didn't you? I was reading about you clamped down on the opening of casinos. That didn't endear you to the Aboriginals. Now, I was surprised at the word Aboriginals in the book because I thought that was Australia, but Native Canadians are also called Aboriginals?
Well, they were, first when I got to Canada in 1968, they were called Indians.
Okay.
So we were
the real ones arrived.
We were the other kind of Indians.
Yeah.
And they always used to get angry. They said, "Don't call yourself Indians. We are the Indians." And then we started calling them the Aboriginal Canadians. And then I think it changed to the First Nations of Canada. And now we call them Indigenous Canadians.
Right. Okay. Well, I need to get up with the lingo, as I say. Okay, but that was a difficult decision. Did you make enemies through that by, banning casinos?
That was a small issue. Canada is a very sensitive place because Canada is essentially a country of the world. There are people from all over the world as immigrants in that country. Country is still mainly white. And there were negotiations with the Aboriginals. They wanted some gambling arrangements, and wanted different laws to apply to them. And I said, no, nothing doing. Criminal law across the country is one law. And then shortly thereafter, the Premier made me the Attorney General. Unknown to me, there was a huge blockade at an independent, at a private ranch where the First Nations people used to go and dance every year. And then at the end of this particular year of dance, they basically settled down and they said, this is our land, we're not moving.
Gustafson Lake.
It's Gustafson Lake. It's a private ranch.
Yeah.
When the Premier made me the Attorney General in a late night telephone call, didn't tell me that this blockade was brewing.
But he knew.
He knew that, and the moment I became the Attorney General, my deputies took me aside and, sir, you can't go home. We have to brief you on what's happening. And they took me into a room and told me that there were First Nations people holed up in this big ranch with AK-47s and lots of ammo, and they were shooting at fisheries officers and police officers. I didn't know that. So, and that turned into the largest police operation in the history of Canada, with 400 police officers working on that issue, and luckily we were able to put an end to that without any fatalities. That was 1 month when the blockade was going on, that Canadians knew me from the 80s when I was arguing with the extremists and fighting the Khalistanis, speaking out. But I think that 1 month of fighting the people who were holed up, I was in the news almost every evening on television. I was in the newspapers every day. I believe that was the time most Canadians, I think, stopped seeing my color. They just saw me as the Attorney General, not as this brown guy who's an immigrant. And I think to date, that one thing has, it remains in the memory of Canadians. And whenever I'm around, people still come up and say, I wish you were still in politics, but I'm happy that I'm not.
Well, we're happy too, because you can now have time to write books. Yes. But we've touched on, you know, the Native Canadians or the First Nations, but a lot of the things that you had to fight against was your own community. I mean, you weren't always backed by them when it came to elections. You had issues with the pro-Khalistanis. You were attacked by a fellow Sikh, leaving you with 84 stitches and near dead. How did you overcome those? Or you ploughed on doing the right thing and they came round?
Well, I think maybe it needs a bit of an explanation.
Sure.
Otherwise, people would think, why are you talking about that? After the Golden Temple Operation Blue Star, you have to understand that Khalistan in Canada existed before 1984. Many of the people who aren't Punjabis, particularly people abroad, don't understand that Khalistan existed in terms of an issue from the moment Jagjit Singh Chauhan issued a declaration in the United States of America paying hundreds of thousands of dollars and declaring sort of the state of Khalistan independence. Mm-hmm. And from then on, you had the ISI and that time CIA funding these organizations. Long before June of 1984, Talvinder Parmar and his friends, and I knew all of them, by the way. I was one of the only few lawyers in town, and they were my clients in civil matters, many of them. They were running around with Khalistani currency, titles of President of Khalistan or Prime Minister of Khalistan, those kinds of things. So when 1984 happened, there was a fertile ground for this hatred to set in. And we all were shocked. I, in fact, had come to India in December of 1983. The Consul General in Vancouver knew that I was coming and bumped into me at one place and said, look, because in Canada there was a lot of hatred in the Punjabi newspapers and Punjabi radios in December of 1983 and before. And so this Consul General, I still remember his name is B.K. Mitra, just took me aside and said, sir, you should go and see Mrs. Gandhi. And I said, why would she see me? I'm just a lawyer, I'm nobody. He said, no, you should go see Mrs. Gandhi and impress upon her the fact that we need a solution to Punjab issues because it's having an impact in our lives abroad, not only in Punjab. So he set up a meeting for me, and my wife and I traveled in December of '85, and we were here December, January. And then during that time, I met accidentally. I had a long argument with Pindramwale for about an hour on top of the Langar building. I met with Mr. Longowal for about 2 hours, had a deep discussion with him about what was going on. I wanted to do that because if I was going to meet Mrs. Gandhi, I wanted to know what was happening on the ground. And then I met Mrs. Gandhi. My wife was with me, and for the first 5 or 10 minutes we talked about our fathers and grandfathers being in jails and being freedom fighters. And then we got on to the job of what was happening in Punjab. And, you know, my understanding at that time, look, one of the things I should say, I don't have a dog in the race in terms of Indian politics. I don't support A, B, C, or D. I love India. It's my motherland. And that's why I come back. That's why I fight for even there. But I have no political connections or concerns in terms of interest myself. So when we were having that discussion, she says to me, she says, you know, I've had many meetings. She confirmed much of what Sant Longowal had told me about the meetings. But she said that, you know, I'm trying to negotiate a settlement, but I'm worried that every time you have a settlement with the Akalis, there's usually another group that springs up and says, we don't accept that. So there has to be a sense of finality at some point to these issues. And, you know, I, as a lawyer and as an activist, I could empathize with that. Those were the kind of last words she said to me before we left. And then I go back to India, and then June '84 happens, and there was a large demonstration. 25,000 people demonstrated in the city of Vancouver against Operation Blue Star. We said nothing. We were quiet because everybody was hurt. We didn't understand what was going on thousands of miles away. So we thought, you know, let them let out some gas and pressure. Then, you know, in August of '84, I used to be invited to all these cocktail parties at the Indian consulate's home in the mornings, flag ceremony, in the evening cocktail reception. I never usually went because I was a busy lawyer, raising 3 kids, doing other things. But that morning at the flag ceremony, some of the Khalistani extremists jumped the fence and had a running battle with the RCMP, burnt the flag, burnt the tricolor, and had a skirmish. And you had RCMP helicopter overhead, and the RCMP wrestling these guys down. And that kind of, you know, like Golden Temple is very sacred to many of us. But to me, and I wrote that at that time, to me, the tricolor was as sacred. Because although I'm a Canadian citizen, but my Nana spent 8 years in British jails fighting for the independence of the country. His grandfather, his chacha came from Canada as part of the Gadar party to fight for the independence of India and was hanged by the British. So I come from a very different background, a very secular background, and I was concerned. I was concerned on several counts. One, it had taken us a long time in Canada to get equality. Right to vote had been taken away from us in 1907. We got it back in 1947. We couldn't practice professions until 1953, like lawyers, doctors, and engineers. And we had achieved a certain modicum of equality during those years. And I was worried that with all the violence and the threats that were happening in Vancouver and in other parts of Canada,
we'd go backwards.
That we were actually hurting our own image as a community in Canada. I had run twice and lost 2 elections by then. I was an activist. I was well known. So I thought, you know, if I thought hard about it. I talked to my wife, talked to my children, actually. They were very young. But I felt that somebody needed to say something. Everybody was in a state of fear. Silence had gripped the entire community, except the Khalistanis, except the extremists. They were ruling the roost, essentially. So I decided that I would speak up. And it took me a week or so to figure out. I called a press conference. It was widely reported in the national media. And I basically made a couple of points. One, that it is important for us as Indo-Canadian and as Sikhs to make sure that we do no violence in Canada, that promote no violence against India, that if we do so, we are in danger of losing our own respect and equality in this country. Number two, that people have a right to ask for Khalistan. I have no issue with that. That's a freedom. Even the Supreme Court of India says, Canada says you have the freedom of expression to demand anything you want. But I said, violence is not acceptable. If you want to be violent and you want to really demand Khalistan, we disagree with you. And the third thing I said was that if you really want Khalistan, please go back to India and fight there for Khalistan.
Yeah.
And so I received a barrage of threats, and from then on to about 89, 90, I was one of the 2 or 3 people in the entire country, perhaps in the entire Western world at that time, who was speaking against these people, and they targeted me and eventually got me with an iron bar, getting out of my law office. I always say, if it had been the 90s or the current situation, I probably would have been long dead, because there are lots of guns available now. In those days, there weren't that many guns available to people. So that's sort of the essence of the struggle that I went through.
But do you think it's difficult for Western governments with the focus on freedom of speech? I understand with violence, but non-violence, demonstrations, I think the Indian government gets upset sometimes that we are having these but there is freedom of speech, so they can't have one rule for one set of people and one for another.
Well, 2 things. I think you have to sort of distinguish the 2 things. Freedom of expression, yes. Violence and extremism, no. Number 3, Western governments have been somewhat hypocritical. And I've said that publicly. I mean, you see what's happening with Hamas vis-a-vis Israel. And the Western governments, including our own Trudeau, has been very forthright in condemning the glorification of violence on the Canadian streets by Hamas supporters. He was very clear. He condemned it immediately. But he has never condemned the violence and the glorification of violence by the Khalistani extremists, both on the streets, outside the temples, and inside the temples. So I've said this to Canadian politicians. Many of the Canadian politicians have no backbone, I'm sorry to say. I've said that publicly. And that's not to say anything personal against anybody. They know what extremists do on the streets and inside the temples, and what they preach is wrong. But they can't bring themselves to say, okay, folks, we understand it's your right to ask for Khalistan. Given. But we, as a democracy, as the government of Canada, as the leaders of Canada, do not support the dismemberment of a friendly democracy, no matter how faulty that democracy may be. It is still a democracy. It is still a democratic country. But no Canadian politicians has had the courage. So when I know Indian politicians are rather touchy. You know, Indian culture, I'm an Indian through and through. Indian culture is very jingoistic. Because, we've done that strike and this strike and we've done this, and we don't sort of think calmly about these issues and what the implications, long-term implications are of those issues. And so we get kind of, all these things get lost. Yeah. But the things the Indian government needs to say to Canada is, first, if you have the evidence against people like Nijjar or anybody else, present it in a formal request for extradition. Several people, pursuant to the extradition treaty, have been already returned to India to face prosecutions. They should formally present the cases to the Canadian government. Number 2, not be so touchy. If the Canadian government says, it's their right to ask for Khalistan, we can't do anything. They can't do anything about that. No. But they should say to Trudeau and to the US and to Britain that you should condemn the dismemberment of a friendly country. Why aren't you doing that? You consider us friendly? Please condemn the movement that is trying to dismember your friendly country.
Can you tell me, is the next generation feeling as strongly about these things, or is it a certain, the first generation who went over to Canada, to the UK? Are the youngsters as excited by it all?
I wish I was a social scientist, although I did some sociology courses in my BA, but that's a very difficult question. First of all, if you ask, and I've experienced it, if you ask all Canadian Sikhs, the Khalistanis should stand up and be counted. I did that with them in 1984, 85. They used to say, vast majority of the Sikhs want Khalistan. So I said to them, I said, show me. I said, take Guru Granth Sahib out of a temple, hold a rally in a public place, and say only Khalistanis should attend. They fell for it. They held a rally at Queen Elizabeth Park in Vancouver. On the first anniversary of June 84, it was June 85. No more than 200 people showed up. Okay? And then they thought that they had, done something wrong. The following year, they went to Agrodome, PNE. It's a big complex. I think they had 250 people. So if you ask people to stand up for Khalistan, they would not, because most people aren't Khalistanis. If I'm a Khalistani, I have two friends, I take them to the demonstration. People cover their faces when they're demonstrating. So 95% or more of the Sikhs in Canada and across the world are not Khalistanis. So when you stop issuing visas to us sitting abroad, you are actually creating problems for your friends that love your country.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, nobody explained the bells. So is this to warn me that I've got, 10 minutes? 10 minutes, thank you, okay. I did want to touch on your recent book, the novel, The Past is Never Dead. It focuses on the life of a Dalit who leaves India, makes a very successful life for himself in the UK, but caste follows him throughout his life in many, many ways. For me, it signifies your sort of dedication to equality for everyone. Do you want to tell us more about the book and your protagonist, Kalu?
Well, Kalu is a young Dalit whose father quits India in 1942. Just when Gandhi gives the call for quit India, he quits India because of caste and borrows some money and ends up in Britain, in Bedford. Incidentally, I lived in Bedford for 3.5 years. And then the caste follows him into Britain. And I was moved to write this story of some incidents that had happened in my presence in the first week of my existence in Bedford. This is the story of my friends in Britain, in India. I'd wanted to write it since 1965. Never had time. I took a typing course. I gave it up because I couldn't keep up with the class in 1983. I wanted to write then. And then 1984 happened, and life just took over. And now I was free after writing my autobiography, a paperback edition of which has just been published. See this one here? This is the novel. I've written actually 4 other novels. 3 are in a queue to be published by the same publisher. In fact, I have the same publisher as Mr. Prabhakar, Speaking Tiger. By the way, I have your book. He gave it to me, and it's sitting with me in Canada. So, this is a tribute. This book, The Past is Never Dead, is a tribute to my friends in Bedford, my best friends in Bedford.
It was interesting, though, because he doesn't just comment on the casteism towards Galu. Galu's mother, who herself is a Dalit, moves to London. In their home are 2 black men living as tenants, and she will have nothing to do with them. She calls them hubshis. There's another Dalit character who is lower in the pecking order, And again, she's very derogatory about that. So it's a two-way thing. And I witnessed this in the UK myself.
And that's the truth of life.
People, we are very racist ourselves. Yeah. So it's, I don't know how you change that, but sorry, this is your show, but if I can just touch on something. When I was growing up in the UK, the 60s, 70s, there was a lot of racism. And what the UK did, they educated children in their schools. They took them to mandirs, to masjids, to synagogues. Is any effort being made here to deal with that for the caste system, to break it down? You have the quotas in jobs and universities, but maybe it needs to start at a lower level. But that's not for me to tell you. I leave that to you guys to try and do something about it.
I want to take a couple of questions. You want to take some questions?
Yeah, shall we take some questions now? Yeah, why not? Anybody with any questions? Okay, do you want to take the mic there?
Hello. Hello. Yeah. You said that the Canadian government condemns people who try to divide India out there.
No, that doesn't condemn.
They don't condemn.
No, that's what I've asked them to do. I said, you should, as a friendly country, say, freedom of expression, yes, but we don't support what you're trying to do. You're trying to dismember a friendly country. They haven't done that.
And there's no law that stops them from even talking about dismembering a friendly country. Can't they be booked?
No.
The people who are...
No. Freedom of speech?
No, that's freedom of speech. Violence and hate are prosecutable, but not freedom of speech.
Okay. Can we take it to the gentleman in the front here? Sorry, sir, I have seen you further back. I will come to you.
Okay, freedom of speech, what Balaji was saying, but now I don't know how far it is correct. Day before yesterday, this guy Panu, he says now we will invade and put an attack similar to Hamas. So at least this is illegal. Canadian government should book him.
Well, if he had said that...
Yeah, it is in the media, I hope, yeah.
If he had said that on Canadian soil, police should investigate that and book him for hate speech.
Okay.
If he has done that on the American soil because he's an American,
Okay.
I think Canadian police should have perhaps reasonable grounds to investigate him for the statement that he made that all Hindus should be expelled from Canada. Now that is hate speech.
Yeah,
that is hate speech, and that is prosecutable.
Now we're preparing for attack like Hamas. So I'll share with you the where I saw, and then let's write to them.
Yes, Mr. Sani.
Thank you. Thank
Can we go to the gentleman further back? Sorry, I see a hand here. We'll come to you.
Sir, every time you came to India, there is Khalistan attached to you. Every time you discussed about Khalistan. And this time when you came, a lot of things happened. And
this time when I came, Khalistan actually preceded me.
Yeah, exactly. So my question is, like, I was not born in 1984. This time, in the first time in my life, in the international press, the Sikh issues, this Khalistan movement have been discussed for all good or bad reasons. So what do you think that if there is a political problem back in India or in Punjab, you met to Miss Gandhi as well, if the things would have been come to any sort of finality, so this type of diplomatic embarrassment or a distasteful would have been avoided?
Are you talking about the current spat between Canada
yes,
and India?
If there is the long pending political problem,
well, I think
so still shadowing our relations.
Yeah, but if you're talking about the current spat, there are no angels in this spat. I think Prime Minister Trudeau had other options to deal with this issue. He could have dealt with it by allowing the press to talk about it and say we are aware of it, we're dealing with, or get the foreign minister to say something, rather than elevating it to the level of a somber statement in Parliament. And he may have had some political compulsions. People talk about his low numbers. But in your country here, there are equal political compulsions. Mr. Modi is one of the greatest polarizers I've ever seen on the Indian scene, Indian political scene. He polarizes every second he speaks. And then he polarizes by not speaking on Manipur, on lynchings, on Dalits being lynched, on Muslims being lynched. He says nothing. So he polarizes by speech and by silence. So you have your own problems in this country. Canada has its own problems. And, you know, I grew up in a secular family, a Sikh secular family.
Yeah.
My idea of, like, I'm not an Indian citizen, so I'm not criticizing anybody, but my idea of
Madhur,
India
I'm
that
gonna
I
go to that
love
gentleman first.
is
Thank you.
disappearing by the second.
Hello. In fact, when a person moves abroad, he does not move economically, but he also moves culturally and carries his caste and religious identity, which is a known fact. So in India, we have exported, along with IT, we have exported a caste system and all the discriminatory practices. Now, the point is, of course, what, Madam, you said that we are not doing what Britain does. In Britain, you have compulsory education of religion, history, and sex. And the way religion is taught is very different. So that makes it different. But why is it that the Indian community, which is so dominant in Canada, Australia, UK, and USA, they themselves are discriminating among themselves, and the government is coming out with legislations like the Atrocities Act of SC/ST, which we have in India. UK tried to come out with it. Well, it didn't go through. Seattle tried to get through. It was passed. The governor refused to sign. California. Seattle, they have made it. So this is on and on and on. So why our elite, the Sikh elite, the Hindu elite in Canada, UK, USA, why don't they overcome this kind of hatredness?
They're not
We all hate each
interested in
other.
it.
Thank you.
They've carried it from here, and they're not interested because it gives them a sense of position that they don't have in their new communities. I feel that's my.
And secondly, I think you shouldn't think that all of us that have gone out are the elite. We are probably, I always used to say, I don't say it anymore because now you have richer immigrants that have started going entrepreneurs or investors. But when I went to Canada, England and Canada, working class, ordinary peasants and small farmers, they used to actually go to those places. So we aren't the economic elite. You know, and but in terms of ideas, I think we carry those ideas with us. But one of the things I should say to you, the legislation in those countries is reasonably necessary. Seattle has done it as a city council. California tried to do it. Gavin Newsom, the governor, rejected it. I say wrongly. He said, well, we already have grounds of vast grounds under which we can prohibit caste discrimination. They have none. If we use his logic, we should remove the race and gender and those kinds of prohibited grounds of discrimination, and that'd be fine. No, it won't be fine. So you have caste issues here, Indians have caste issues abroad, and there's no reason why there shouldn't be legislation prohibiting discrimination based on caste in Canada, in British Columbia, or in Britain.
Sorry, sir, I don't want to discriminate, but you've had a fair share of questions on that young lady. Can we go to her, please? It's apparently the last question we're allowed.
Okay. I have a very small question. So it's a factual question. It will not take long.
That wasn't the last.
Okay. And I'll give the mic to the lady. The narrative which we get from the media here, that Trudeau is, he's dependent on those 17 or 18 MPs of this thing. But you told that they have very less support there of Khalistani. So how come, we are not able to understand this. And then plus you have other non-Sikhs also who are voting. Okay.
Quickly. If I say Khalistanis are 5 or 6 or 7%, any given riding, if there are 20 or 30,000 Sikhs, of that 5 or 6% becomes 2 or 3%, 2 or 3,000. Some ridings are won or lost by 2 or 3,000. So, that's why Indian MPs of all hues, conservative or liberal or the NDP, Indian MPs of all hues in Canada have no backbone, have no spine. They have never spoken against the efforts to dismember India, right? Because they don't want to antagonize anybody.
Hello.
Really quick.
Hello.
So the only question I have left is that with the situation that's happening right now, I personally, I may be wrong, but I feel like it's very political there as well because he wants his vote, he wants his bank, everything. But my question is, do you think that the Prime Minister making a statement like that in Canada has the potential of backfiring in India for the people in India?
Well, it's already backfired. So, and he shouldn't have done it that way.
Yeah.
Many political leaders and thought leaders in Canada say that he perhaps has damaged himself as an interlocutor vis-a-vis India.
Yeah.
He shouldn't have done it that way. It should have been raised. Look, if India has done it, gone across international borders and killed somebody, that is legally, by international law, wrong.
Yes.
But, and it doesn't make it right just because the US does it or somebody else does it. But there were other options in the way they dealt with it. They could have dealt with it better.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
This is B.M. Singh from Amritsar. I have a question.
I think we've had
The
the last
question
question.
is-
Madhur is very strict here. I think I need... Madhur, up to you.
I am an ardent supporter of Khalistan. Why? A big why, 10 feet high why? Why? Because if the Hindus,
Thank you, sir, for your question.
Hindus want
Mr.
Hindu
Dosanjh, would you like to take
Hindus
this
want
one-on-one
Hindu
after the
Rashtra.
session, please?
What is wrong
No, I
in
can-
asking for Khalistan?
Let's have a conversation over
And
coffee.
anybody
Lunch.
can demand anything. There is nothing wrong in it.
I'll answer it very briefly.
That is very important.
Very, very briefly.
And they don't want Khalistan.
Thank you, sir. Thank
They
you.
want Khalistan. That means empty place. And there is an empty place between India
Sir, our badge,
and
10
10
please.
feet long.
Thank you.
Empty
Thank
place.
you.
That is Khalistan.
Would you like
That
to
is
take
what they
this
want.
one-on-one,
Point
please?
taken, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Kim. Thanks, Ujjal. Thank you, sir, for your question. I'm sure he'll address it personally. Our next session is also equally power-packed. We've been reading for